You're listening to an African Elements top news story for April 10th, 2025. Please visit our website at africanelements.org for more daily news. MI Cops drag Black Man. Off bus. Beat him, Walmart lawsuit by Darius Spearman. Another troubling incident involving law enforcement and a black man has surfaced, this time in Michigan. Reports detail how Michigan police officers are accused of using excessive force. They allegedly dragged a black man off a city bus, beat him violently, and then took him to Walmart. The officers apparently wanted to prove he had stolen items from the store. This event underscores ongoing concerns about police interactions with black communities. The Atlanta Black Star report specifically describes the forceful removal from the bus and the subsequent beating by officers. After this violent encounter, the officers transported the man to a local Walmart. Their goal was seemingly to confirm suspicions of theft. However, their accusations turned out to be completely wrong. Consequently, the man is now filing a lawsuit seeking justice for the ordeal. This specific case doesn't exist in a vacuum. There are broader concerns about excessive force and potential racial bias within Michigan law enforcement. These larger issues provide critical context for understanding the bus incident. The ACLU complaint meticulously details 20 separate incidents involving alleged excessive force by Taylor police officers. These incidents raise serious questions about racial bias influencing police conduct. Furthermore, the documented instances show aggressive tactics being used repeatedly. This pattern fuels calls for systemic reform and increased accountability for law enforcement agencies across Michigan. The Michigan incident, particularly the element of being taken to Walmart under false suspicion, echoes similar situations elsewhere. A pattern emerges where overly aggressive law enforcement actions seem linked to racial profiling or mistaken identity. This Florida case resulted in allegations of racial profiling and prompted a federal lawsuit against both the deputy and Walmart. Like the Michigan situation, this event highlights significant issues. Mistaken identity combined with potentially excessive force creates situations that understandably lead to legal challenges. Understanding what legally constitutes excessive force is crucial. There isn't a simple, rigid definition. Instead, courts evaluate whether the force used was objectively reasonable given the specific circumstances. The force used must be proportional to the threat perceived by the officer. The Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution protects citizens against unreasonable seizures, which includes the use of excessive force during arrests or detentions. Systemic racial disparities are an undeniable reality in American policing. Research and data consistently show that black individuals face disproportionate contact with law enforcement. This includes higher rates of stops, searches, and, critically, the use of force. These patterns aren't just isolated incidents. They reflect broader societal inequities. Data starkly illustrates this disparity. The legal ambiguities surrounding reasonable force can unfortunately create space for subjective decisions, potentially influenced by racial stereotypes. Moreover, many current policing policies, sometimes termed colorblind, fail to adequately address these underlying systemic inequities, allowing bias to persist in stops, searches, and force incidents. Police misconduct, particularly excessive force, carries significant financial consequences for cities and taxpayers. These settlements represent a direct cost stemming from failures in policing. While the specific amounts vary greatly depending on the jurisdiction and the details of each case, the overall financial impact is undeniable. These settlements highlight the systemic problems surrounding the police use of force. Importantly, they underscore the need for accountability when misconduct occurs, not just for justice but also to mitigate these significant financial burdens on communities. The tragic reality is that incidents like the one in Michigan are part of a long, painful history. Unarmed African Americans have disproportionately been subjected to excessive and often lethal force by law enforcement in the United States. This historical data provides essential background for understanding the present moment. It helps explain why recent cases, including the Michigan bus incident, receive intense scrutiny and often lead to protests and legal action. When individuals believe their constitutional rights have been violated by police, such as through excessive force, they can pursue legal action. Federal lawsuits are commonly filed under a law known as Section 1983. This law allows people to sue government officials, including police officers, for civil rights violations. To win such a lawsuit, the plaintiff must prove that the officers acted unreasonably under the totality of the circumstances standard. Juries ultimately decide whether the force used was objectively excessive based on the evidence presented. Cases involving mistaken identity, like the Florida Walmart incident, raise complex questions. These errors can stem from various factors including flawed identification procedures, poor descriptions, or simply rushed judgments by officers. While sometimes an honest mistake, systemic issues like inadequate training or implicit racial bias can increase the likelihood of such errors occurring. Determining the exact cause often requires a close look at the specific case details. It's important to distinguish between mistaken identity and racial profiling, though they can overlap. Mistaken identity, conversely, is technically an error in identification. However, racial bias might influence an officer's perception, making them more likely to misidentify someone from a particular group or overestimate a perceived threat level during an encounter, potentially leading to excessive force. Ensuring police accountability is a major focus of reform efforts. However, the effectiveness of these measures often depends heavily on consistent implementation and enforcement. Despite these tools, inconsistent enforcement of rules and resistance to external oversight remain persistent challenges. Therefore, meaningful reform often requires sustained public pressure and legal action alongside policy changes. Copyright African Elements.